Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Patrick Liu, and I'm going to be your host for the Diabetes Survival Guide show. I'm the founder of the Diabetes Management Group, where I am a fitness and wellness coach for people with type 2 diabetes and prediabetes. And this show will be a way to share the phenomenal stories about people with all forms of diabetes, healthcare professionals who work with people with diabetes, health and wellness coaches who work with people in this population, and or caregivers and relatives with people with diabetes across the world. A little bit of a personal background for me as a show starter is I was diagnosed with prediabetes back in 2021 and made some modifications to my lifestyle and habits to successfully reverse it in 2022. However, that onset of me receiving prediabetes in 2021 triggered my memories of when my grandpa, who passed away when I was a sophomore in high school from kidney failure secondary to his type 2 diabetes, about the care that was misunderstood and not the greatest at that time. So I want to provide this show as a way to explore the different spectrums of diabetes and healthcare professionals sharing their tips of what they've seen helpful in working with folks with them, and then some things that weren't as helpful so that y'all can learn something. So thank you so much, and we'll get started with the disclaimers and the show.
Disclaimers. This show is not medical advice or a treatment plan and may contain sensitive and explicit content. It is intended for general education and demonstration purposes only. This content should not be used to self-diagnose or self-treat any health, medical, or physical conditions. Don't use this show to avoid going to your own healthcare professional or to replace the advice they give you. Consult with your healthcare provider before attempting anything you learned in this show. You agree to identify and hold harmless the creators of this material for any and all losses, injury, or damages resulting from any and all claims that arise from your use or misuse of this show material. The creators and guests of this show make no representations about the accuracy or suitability of this content. Use these materials at your sole risk. Views and opinions are individual to the creators and guests of this show and do not represent any other opinions or entities and are not intended to offend anybody. We hope you enjoy the show. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Diabetes Survival Guide show. I am joined by the amazing Patrick Walker. He has extensive experience of being a physical therapist and has a great understanding and wealth of knowledge of working with people with concussions and youth athletes and even working in the home health field. And he's seen a variety of patients, and I'm super stoked to call him one of my mentors and friends throughout my process and journey of my physical therapy schooling and even life advice in general too, because Patrick has been great in just sharing his insights and knowledge of how life goes. And it honestly, like, I could go on this forever, but I think it's best to try and have Patrick talk about this. So Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today. And as we kind of get started, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about how you got diagnosed and your story behind prediabetes.
Okay. First off, thank you, Patrick. It's always good to interact with another person with a similar name, which does get confusing at times when we talk and other social gatherings and whatnot. So
it's very hectic.
So it is funny, but I thank you so much for that nice kind of compliment. I do appreciate that. And the kudos goes back to you. You also have a lot of been my springboard for a lot of stuff too. You have a lot of life hand knowledge too, even at your age, difference of experience and being in your education of a PT. There's always stuff that does change, hopefully somewhat other things. But yeah, so basically my story when it comes to pre-diabetes, I do come from a family that diabetics. My father has type 2 diabetes. My older brother has type 2 diabetes. Right now I'm in the pre-diabetic stage, and luckily it's, I believe, going to skip my I don't think my younger brother is going to be the risk because he has basically been a stellar athlete. He has no body fat. Even at his late 40s, he has the body of a 20-year-old. So it's really not. I'm not saying that the whole stereotypical things is just because a person looks fit doesn't mean that they can't be diabetic. You can always look into certain celebrities and whatnot that are diabetic that do, and you're like, that guy's in really phenomenal shape. Doesn't always mean like they don't have it, or they could have been on type 1 and just been that way. But that's where it's been a little bit more of a fear for me with all the other things that are out there as far as what the progression of this sort of condition can do to people long term. Like I say, I've had multiple patients in my experience that have lost their lower legs to diabetes. And that's been more of a wake up call for me to be more diligent on monitoring everything else and getting my blood work checked out and just trying to be more of an advocate of getting everybody else, the ones that are diabetic, to really get on them about you should be monitoring your sugars a lot more closer. You should be watching what you eat. You should also be exercising more to combat everything else, even if it's just simple movements are always the keys to that. And that's where I think a lot of this has always been a scare, because I've had a couple of times where I've had scores where in the higher aspect of pre-diabetes that had me more concerned and had me to where something's got to change here. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just I may have to go into the route of reaching out to a functional medicine specialist just to see if I have food sensitivities that also could be leading me to have that sort of stuff. And the flip side too is I know my eating habits are not been the best because I'm a father of 2 kids and working the crazy hours I do as a PT makes it a little tougher to actually eat healthier with stuff. And you don't want to be the one that's the outlier when they're eating like McDonald's. You're kind of like, okay, let me just get a salad. But it is those sort of things. But at the same time, I also have a big sweet tooth. So that's my downfall. I am a glorified chocoholic. I love chocolate so much. You could put on a boot, I would eat the thing.
What?
So, oh yeah, that's how much I really love chocolate. Any sweets is just ridiculous, but I've had to really taper down and change a little bit of my cravings for that. I've even worked with a dietitian for several bouts just to help me get a better control of prevention of diabetes with it as well. So there's been stuff that I'm like, I really have to go back every so often and look at what she recommended, just the things of how to change my eating habits and how to get rid of the sugar cravings to make it a little bit more feasible for me. It's always just a little bit of a roundabout that's always in the back of my mind, has me a little more scared of it, just because of the fact I will be turning 50 this year. And it's one of those sort of things where I'm really still trying to keep myself as much in shape as I can to also help prevent future injuries, any of the other health wise, because it's always funny because we as health professionals always have this, like when you have patients that are telling you like, what? They're like, you're looking pretty good shape, but you still got a little bit of you still got a little bit of the dad bod. I'm like, sorry. I'm trying to. I'm working on it, but it is, and that's why it's. But you're a PT. You should be in phenomenal shape. Yeah, but not all PTs can have that because sometimes it's just genetics. And you can't always. You get what you're stuck with, so you can't always. You can do it the best you can, but you also cannot fight against time and all the other stuff that goes into physiological stuff with it when it comes to that sort of prevention. So there's certain things you can do and certain things you just can't. As long as you're doing your best to do it, that's all you can really do. So
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And I can totally empathize with the situations you've had because my grandpa, he passed away from his type 2 diabetes, and kidney failure was the cause of it, but it was secondary to his type 2 diabetes. And also being an Asian American, the American Diabetes Association says that for East Asians who immigrate to the US or East Asians in general in the US, whenever they start to eat the whole staple glorified American diet, they say they're not quite sure what it is, but it just increases our predisposition for it. And being in the pre-diabetic realm, there's always that little voice in my head saying, hey, like, you got to keep on making sure that you eat super clean. You got to keep on working out. And it's just a negative voice that's in my head that fear just looms over it. And I could definitely empathize with your background and situation when I was first diagnosed with it. And I'd also say, as you mentioned before, some people who are really fit but still having like type 2 diabetes, like Tom Hanks, he's one of the prime examples, in my opinion, who has type 2 diabetes, and he still looks pretty fit even for his age. And when he played as Forrest Gump, you wouldn't even have known. And he looked like he was pretty lean and he was awesome, but it can happen to anybody. Diseases don't discriminate, is what they say. And I'd also say, too, like, even stress being a huge factor in increasing the amount of symptoms that you would have. Because I know with you having two kiddos and then also being a dad and a husband and working with physical therapy jobs and moving her all around, like that's definitely very stressful. And of course, seeing the patients who do have type 2 diabetes and saw that they had amputations, that's very tough to say too, because it's wow, like I could end up in their situation if I don't get myself into shape, if I don't start making the good recommendations that my dietitian has talked about. And even the cravings get pretty tough too. I'm not sure about you, but hunger pains is not a fun time.
I can tell one thing that definitely satiates my hunger pains is more so just water has still been the one thing I've noticed. Try
Yeah.
drinking a gallon of water a day. That will basically take away some of your hunger pains
Oh,
because
yeah.
basically your stomach's more full because it's liquid. Liquid takes up more space in your gut, but it's also where it's like, eh. But I'm not saying that it's be all end all, but it definitely has changed a little bit of my amount of food that I intake. That is, even if it's clean, it definitely has been smaller. So that's been helping a little bit the weight management of it. But it's also when the flip side is I'm still looking into, you mentioned stress, I'm still looking into the whole fact of cortisol because cortisol is another thing that is a stress hormone that can also promote more weight gain. And my concern is just, all right, I don't think all this weight gain I'm getting is coming from muscle mass. I do work out pretty hard. I do use a technology called BFR because there's been studies that shows that using this blood flow restrictive technology can also regulate person's blood sugar and decrease your risk of diabetes. The studies are not exactly the best, but it is something that is out there showing very good promise. So that's why I'm trying to use that in conjunction with everything else to make it a little bit more of prevention. So anybody else who listens to this, that's one thing I'd recommend looking into just as well, because it's not that it's something where you have to use it. You can use very light weights. You don't have to be like really doing a very aggressive sort of workout, but it basically does help the fact of it, your insulin and your blood sugar levels too. So
Yeah. And I've definitely read those research articles, and thanks again for sharing them with me. A lot of them were theories, and
yeah.
it's very promising to try and see what those future research articles will do once they start having controlled trials. With blood flow restriction, for those who don't know, it'd be like you put the cuff between your like arms or your legs, and you put some slight compression on it. It's like using a blood pressure cuff, but not occluding it all the way. Instead, it's just partially. So then it could increase the amount of demand that your muscles need. So then it would use more glucose, and that glucose is coming from your blood sugars to try and help aid with making that muscle burn up those molecules in order for it to regulate your blood sugar levels and in turn hopefully improve your insulin sensitivity and those other values and biomarkers right there. So yeah, definitely a lot of things that are going on. And with water, I wanted to circle back on that. I believe
Uh-huh.
there's been some research articles that shown that sometimes feelings of dehydration can increase or exacerbate symptoms of the hunger pains or increasing the amount of cravings that people have. And sometimes you're dehydrated, and instead of your body telling you that you're thirsty, it's telling you that, hey, I am craving something else, because our minds work more in the path of least resistance. And if our mind is constantly focusing on trying to satiate our sweet tooth, that's the path that it would take compared to saying, oh, let's take the track to tell our brain that we're thirsty. But since we go with the craving part majority of the time, that just speeds up that cycle that it forgets that it's thirsty, because now you have more miscommunication that's going on due to all the cravings. It's crazy to see that even other biomarkers that we do have, or those other values that is talked about, it can be masked, and the root cause is actually something else that's more common, such as dehydration. So thank you for sharing that tip of making sure that we're hydrated, because that definitely helps with a ton of things. I even helped my cravings a few times too, and my hunger
Mhm.
pains. All right, what would you say has been the hardest moment when you were diagnosed with prediabetes, and what would you say that you've learned from it?
I think the hardest moment is how the fear of it progressing quickly, if it did, if it was like, oh, there's always that fear going into the doctor's office and him looking at the values and be like, oh no, you guys, now you're diabetic. And it's one of the sort of fears of just not being there for my family, not being able to be there for my wife and everything else has me more concerned. And there are many times where I've had that kind of feeling of fear. I am a Christian, but I also go to God. I'm like, God, please just don't let me get diabetes if I can. Please avoid it. But at the same time, it's one of those sort of things where like you get the news, it's like, all right, you're under the gun as far as just in that pre-diabetic range. But all right, but I'm still there. But I still would like to be a little bit less. So it's like, but it's like, all right, but I have to also figure it out because at the same time, it's okay. I skipped this bite. I could go eat a Snickers bar or something else. And it's, you're just so worried about this. Now you're doing the things. You're trying to eat sugar and trying to spike your insulin and spike everything else, strike the blood sugar up. It's like you're just trying to work on, trying to get yourself more control. So it's a little bit more of that sort of thing. So it's more of that fear of just not being there for my families. The ultimate concern that I've learned from it is just learning to reach out and get help and talk to people such as yourself and everybody else who is more of a expert or has knowledge in this sort of field of stuff. That's why it's just like reaching out to a dietitian. It was nice that my doctor recommended this dietitian plan, and so I only, but insurance did pay for about 6 visits, which was nice. And I still have the information she gave me, but it is a good thing. But it's also where mine was basically when you had to ask, you had to fill out the intake for their plan. It was like, what is your goal for this? Is it to lose weight? Is it this? And I told her flat out, I said, I want to control or get my pre-diabetes much more under control, as well as my cholesterol. So 2 big factors that run rampant in my family that I'd rather get control of now, having to deal with this stuff and being on medication and all the other stuff that goes against it. And I'm more of into the homeopathic stuff. There's stuff out there that people can use, but some of that homeopathic stuff does work. Some of it doesn't. Certain supplements work with people, some people don't. Just our bodies are very sensitive to certain things, and some they're more sensitive to, and some they're not. And it's just those sort of factors. It's just it really plays with your head of trying to find a solution that can work for you because you see somebody else. Oh yeah, just do this, and that's how my blood pressure dropped down. Yeah, it doesn't work for me, or anything else.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast. And before we continue with the rest of this show, I wanted to let y'all know, please feel free to give this podcast a 5-star rating if you like it. Share it with other folks that you think it'd be beneficial for. And if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe and follow to the Diabetes Management Group for awesome tips to manage your type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. And let's get back to the show. Thank you so much for sharing and being vulnerable too, because it shows that you really do care about providing for your family and being supportive of them and being a great dad and a great husband. And of course, having pre-diabetes running between your mind and always nagging at you, it's pretty stressful per se, especially with the direction that it does go. And it seems like every time you go to the doctor's office, it's that fear of, crap, am I going to get that diagnosis or am I going to dodge a bullet? It's like playing Russian roulette with yourself. And I could very much imagine stress that becomes of it. And do you care if I share some of my tips and everything?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's with one of the clients that I'm currently working with, we found some great success, and also based off of the other dietitians and specialists that are out there in the field, one of whom is a exercise physiologist, and a variety of the people that I follow on Instagram, like Reversing Type 2 Diabetes, that has Jose, who's the exercise physiologist that specializes in working with people with type 2 diabetes, and he works with a dietitian who I believe has her certified diabetes education care specialist, so the CDCES, and generally anyone who has that credentials that shows that they are very much so specialists in the realms of diabetes and working with them. And then Ben Zeal, he's also another person that I admire because he's a registered dietitian who has type 1 diabetes, been living it for a while, and also has a certified strength and conditioning specialist. So he's able to understand both the strength and conditioning aspect, programming, and moving forward with it. And just based off that accumulation of knowledge that I've seen from their posts, doing some of the research on my own for nutritional sciences, and just found out that timing also plays a huge role too with those other factors. So for example, things that I've found helpful for myself and some stories that I've heard that has been consistently helpful for other people, and based off the literature that's out there, it would be whenever you want to eat a meal, you can definitely eat that meal and then going for a 15-minute walk right afterwards. That could actually stimulate the oxidative system for burning some of those calories in that aspect, but it's also stimulating your muscles through all of them together, because every time you take a step, you're activating literally every single one of your muscles in your body, because all those ground reaction forces come back up to the chain. And then it says to the muscle saying, hey, I need to start working to stabilize my body so I just don't fall apart. And by going on those 15 to 20-minute walks afterwards, that could actually help with regulating that feature spike that would have happened in 2 hours later after eating, which is pretty beneficial. And I've been using a continuous glucose monitor and recognizing those trends, and that's been pretty helpful too. Other things too is being able to eat things that are high in protein and high in fiber at the start of every meal, then eating whatever else that comes afterwards. So if someone really has that strong craving for, let's say, that sweet tooth, then you could try and eat a salad with some vinegar on there. Apple cider vinegar has been shown to help suppress the hunger pains and appetite bouts, because it's a way to try and confuse your taste receptors to say, hey, I'm eating something. Then it just tells the brain, calm down, like I'm more settled. And by doing so, by the time you reach your sweet tooth, then you can eat a little bit, but then also try and intermix some of it with the proteins and the high fibery foods. And it does a good job of balancing it out. So now that it has more fiber and you have more protein to try and suppress more of the hunger hormones, and that additional fiber as it's being digested through, it takes a bit longer for it to digest through, and it would blunt the amounts of spikes that you would have and have more of that regulation for your blood sugar levels. And I found that pretty helpful as tips of taking a step back and understanding, oh, so these tools do help it, and I'm able to understand the trends by going along with it too. And a personal experience for me that I'm currently doing, it's when I got my continuous glucose monitor, there's actually the Freestyle Libre 2 that offers a free 14-day trial with their continuous glucose monitor that people can utilize as a resource. They would just need a prescription from their doctor to utilize it. And since I have prediabetes, I was like, I don't really want to see my primary care provider for the situation, because I feel that they wouldn't care enough, sadly, in this medical model in the United States to prescribe that for me. So instead, they actually have an option right there to say, hey, you can actually get a medical prescription from an online site. You just pay $15 for it, for them to give you the script to get your continuous glucose monitor, which then you can pick up at a Walmart or other like CVS or whatever close thing that's on there. It took me maybe about like 15 minutes to get that entire process done. And I was able to get it, and I'm currently using the app to monitor it and YouTube a few videos to learn how to apply it and read the sensors. And it's been good just learning more about how my lifestyle habits, the foods that I'm currently eating, and I even decided to eat some pizza just to see what my blood glucose response would have been in response to that, and how my exercises would have blunted those efforts. And I found some pretty good benefits of literally increasing the amount of walks that I have right after the meal, or exercising, then eating in a meal immediately afterwards, because our muscles are like, hey, I'm pretty hungry right now because you just worked me out. And by having that food right afterwards, it's able to basically suck up those nutrients and immediately go to the muscles, compared to staying and lingering inside of your blood vessels and maintaining a higher blood sugar levels. So those are some things that I found helpful for myself with personal experience, based off the literature and research articles that are out there for diet and nutrition and exercise, and things that I found helpful when working with my current clients. So those are just some practical tips that if you're like, oh, that's something that I might try, then there's that. And it's helped me a lot with my mindfulness as well. Instead of focusing on the fear of, crap, am I playing a Russian roulette game of having my pre-diabetes turn into type 2 diabetes? Instead, I'm more empowered of, oh, diabetes, if you take a step back, isn't really what your A1C scores are. Instead, it's more about those smaller lifestyle habits and changes that you make. And then the A1C levels will do its best to reflect that. And my lab value scores has I've seen those trends with it by making those small adjustments to my diets. And even seeing the feedback from my continuous glucose monitor, it's shown that it's been pretty beneficial and helpful. And it also tests what my sensitivity is, because my genetics is going to be different than someone else's. But having that continuous glucose monitor on the side just for a little bit, it's been helpful at least to track what certain foods might spike it up a lot higher compared to others.
Tell me about this from your ethnicity. How you mentioned at the start, how with Asian Americans when they came over to this country, how they adopted the American diet. Did you ever find out the diabetes levels of people over in your native country, what their diabetes risk was? Was it less because of what they were intaking, or was it something in their kind of their diet? Just like how with certain things, with what I've learned about cholesterol, oh, the best thing for you is doing the Mediterranean lifestyle. How the people in Mediterranean, they have less risk for cholesterol and stuff like that, or things of that nature.
Yeah, so from my understanding, let's take a look at the portion sizes. When you go to China, their portion
Mm-hmm.
sizes, it would just be like that one cup of rice that they would have, and then everything that's in
Okay.
front of them when they serve family style would be things that
Mm-hmm.
are rich in proteins and fats. And
Mm-hmm.
they would have dark green leafy vegetables because they have a huge emphasis for making sure that we eat those because it's healthier for us. And by having those, the main component of your diet is going to be more of those for those main course rather than just eating the white rice. Now, I will say everything's a balance and it depends on what people's goals are because in my opinion, there's no such thing as a perfect diet that's out there. Instead, it's more about a what diet do you want and how can we adjust it so that we can have the appropriate timing so you can enjoy what you want, adjust any physical activity parameters that you can enjoy that what you like. And then if your diet doesn't allow you to get certain vitamins and minerals, because let's say if someone wants to go strictly the Mediterranean diet and they've noticed deficiencies in like their zinc or magnesium, then that's when we could start introducing the supplementation afterwards. Because it's tough with supplements, in my opinion, in this country because it's not regulated by the Food and
Yeah.
Drug Administration. So anyone could put literally anything into your supplements and say, hey, this has all these things. And in reality, they may not even have any of those things in there either. That's why I prefer to go with corporations, companies that are third party tested, because that way then it lets us know that, hey, they were at least vetted by a different company just to make sure that they're holding up to their standards of what they're promoting. And additionally, like once people immigrate and went to America, you would look at the diet here where everything is such larger proportions and our eyes are as big as our stomachs at times, where if you see this one big plate, and also in China, not really, it's not a good cultural norm for someone to not finish eating their food and leaving stuff off the plate because that would be wasting food and it's disrespectful for the farmers, for the animals, and everything that went into those dishes. So I feel like that transition of immigrating to America and seeing that larger portion of food, we don't want to waste that food, so we just keep on consuming it, and then it just skyrockets and increases that risk. And also, if we take a look at the American diet too, a larger increase of simple carbohydrates being consumed, increased amount of processed foods that's being consumed, that it just makes it a bit tough in those situations. And with the Mediterranean diet, I'm not too versed and familiar with it yet, but based off of what I've seen and read from it, that seems to be rich in fiber intake, which does help blunt the responses and does support with lowering cholesterol and regulating blood sugar levels because fiber is not digested. Instead, it's acting as a way to slow down our digestion. So whenever we eat something that's super readily digestible, it instead makes it more of a let's do this nice and easy, nice and slow, instead of doing the shotgun approach where it just wrecks our internal organ system, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It's a balance.
Thanks for
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and thank you for educating me on that sort of aspect of things with that, because you always wonder about the different cultures, how I'm not saying that anything's perfect, that it isn't, but it is kind of unique to see the trends, how it's always that, and you always start to see it, just like you said, the American diet, just because of the risk of everything else, how obesity is so much higher in the US than other countries. For the most part, I know we're basically one of the bigger countries because of how the diet is, just like you said, very simple, easier to eat, simple sugars, as well as the ease and accessibility to the not so all the processed foods than it is the more healthier foods, just because it's just like how if you look at supermarkets in the US, the outer ring is all the stuff that you should be eating. The inner ring is where all the other aisles are basically all the processed stuff and everything else. And look and go through even the frozen food section. Everybody likes to eat the lean cuisines and all that stuff, thinking, "Oh, this is good for me." Not necessarily when you look at all the preservatives that are in it to make it that way with it. And that's always the hardest thing. But it's at the same time, you have to look at it from the socioeconomic status of why diabetes is so much higher, because the fact is, A, the readability of it, and the fact that the price of the simpler things that kids are eating is always going to be cheaper than eating healthier. And especially now with how cost and everything else has risen, that it is harder to get kids to eat the stuff on the outside of the supermarket with things that it is tougher to do that. And that's why you're seeing a lot more rise in childhood obesity and childhood diabetes and things of that nature, because of the fact of it's just unfortunate that families who are on the lower end of the socioeconomic status cannot afford to eat healthier. So it's tough to do that even of itself.
Yeah, and I also want to touch on the points too. If we take a look at the European standpoint too, of how they eat, one of my friends back in my undergrad, her family immigrated here from, I can't remember which part of Europe, but I think a part of me wants to say England, but I could be wrong. But from what I was hearing, when they went to their country and ate and dined over there, people would spend 4 hours eating a small lunch. So it'd be super conversational, like they would have their cookies and teas, and it would be slow paced and they'd have more conversations. And the meals that they would have is very petite, just small snack sizes, and they would just have some snacks here and throughout the day. And if you look at the roads, they're consistently walking. So mode of transportation, them walking and biking, that's more accessible and more promoted in those areas compared to in the US, it's more commercialized for people to have the roads. So we're just increasing the amount of caloric intakes that we have. And of course, the snacking. And if you increase the amount of screen time that people are sitting down and watching something, majority of the time they want to snack on something as they're watching something, and that increases the amount of calories that they have. And the lack of walking and moving around and even getting the appropriate minerals and nutrients, that also increases the risk factors of getting type 2 diabetes and obesity rates rising up. And of course, with technology being on the rise too, it seems like some of the kids that are out there now, they'd rather spend their time sitting on their couch watching something compared to actually going out to a playground or playing tag and literally moving around. And because of those factors, I feel like we are receiving a rise in that. And I also feel like too, it's the lack of education at times, because I feel like for folks who enjoy eating their processed foods, if they take a step back and realize, oh, I can get canned foods, canned vegetables where they're preserved at more of their peak times of the seasons, even frozen vegetables too, in my opinion, if that's like the option that you do have, sometimes that tends to be a bit more cheaper compared to the processed foods that you have. But I feel like there's a lack of education on how to prepare meals and foods in a way that whenever they try to have something, it's pretty difficult and tough. And a story that is bringing to my mind right now, there's a organization called Cultiva out in Guatemala that I had the fortunate opportunity of doing a service trip out there. Their main emphasis is allowing people in the low socioeconomic areas, or even people who are wealthy, are doing better off and are more in the wealth bracket. They would say, okay, anyone who participates in this training will learn how to garden and farm a garden box. And after you are done and completed with that program, you get a free garden box for your home. And you'll take care of the installation process. We'll support and help you out whenever we need. And the initial startup of the organization that came through it, the first time they tried to test it out, they said, oh, let's do some donations to the local farmers market. But they realized that the wealthier folks also went to the farmers market because it's a no questions asked situation whenever they receive those vegetables and supplies. So then well, that's not as sustainable as we thought it was. So then they decided, what if we just gave people some farms, like a garden box, so that they could grow their own foods, and let's see what happens with that. Then when they gave it to one of their friends to try it out, they came back and it was filled with weeds because they didn't know how to like plant and harvest those vegetables and grow them appropriately. And then the next time when they tried through giving them the appropriate supplies, they found out that it was rotted up by, it either went rotten or bugs ate their vegetables that were there. So like the tomatoes, it was ridden by a bunch of critters, and it just wasn't a good time for that until they finally cracked down the formula of taking a step back and realizing, okay, what if we teach them how to grow and maintain their garden boxes? And when they did that, they went to their friend's place and they saw that, if you've ever seen those magazine covers of it being bountiful with a variety of like tomatoes, celery, broccoli, like thyme, arugula, and all those different vegetables in a huge garden setting, that's what they saw. And when they went there, and they're like, hey, like, why didn't you harvest this? It was because they didn't teach them how to harvest the reaps of their rewards. And once they went through that process, they finally had that system down to educate people how to make that safe self-sustainability program available for them. And when they asked their friends, like, hey, how has your life changed ever since you received the garden box? They were like, they didn't say that they didn't have to worry about food anymore because like their food's already good. Instead, they said the biggest thing that has helped benefited them was that they were able to have a conversation with their wife without anyone yelling. They said that they were able to talk with their kids again because they had a strained relationship where they weren't able to talk with their kids. And that's the impact that motivates me to this day. Like even now I'm getting some chills just reliving and recalling that story, is that they want to, like, by having your needs that are met, everything else falls into the lines too. Yes, it does help improve your physical health and those other factors, but the main factors that people really care about is how does it affect their family dynamics? Because if your diet's better, you're going to have improved moods, you're going to have better values and everything else. But more importantly, it also reduces the amount of stress that people have, and they're able to have their conversations in a more like meaningful manner without that lingering fear or stress or that scarcity mindset. Instead of having more of that abundance mindset to support each other and grow. And that's something that I find very, if we can model that and bring that to the United States where we can cultivate that awesomeness, that'd be amazing.
It's funny because it resonates in my mind. It's the whole adage of like, you can give somebody you can feed somebody fish, but if you teach a person how to fish, they'll never go hungry again. So it's a roundabout. That's their solution to everything else. Is like you said, it's education, having a program which can do this, and people start to realize how it has not just the impact, just like you said, it did not just impact and solve the issue of that problem. It actually solved two problems. It actually improved their communication with their families and everything else, because now they're not as concerned about it because it's all based upon that sort of model. That's very neat to see. It's always where you see that sort of factor of stuff now, that it is in little bits of talking to people. You do see some of that kind of slowly trickling into the U.S. a little bit, slowly but surely. It's just like how in some of the inner cities, they've now started to do more of these rooftop greenhouses and rooftop sort of stuff. They're trying to get people more involved into that sort of thing, being like, hey, instead of you going to the grocery, just start doing this, or everybody else chips in, say like an apartment building. Hey, your job is part of this. This is your plot. It's kind of like that whole garden box. It's just that sort of level. It's a little more work, but guess what? You're getting better fresh stuff than it is going to the market.
I had a couple more questions before
Sure.
we're finished up over here. So how would you say have like your family relationships been with your wife and kids and your journey with your pre-diabetes and that journey with it?
That's hard to really say because, again, I'm not always, I'm slowly getting into learning to say no. It's tough to be the parent and being all that stuff and just standing your ground. It's no, I can't. Just nope. You guys have it. I'm good. And it's always you get the looks at that and it's geez, all right, fine, because they know how much of a sweet tooth person I am, and then they're kind of a little shocked. We're like, yeah, I'm good. So with it, but so it has changed a little bit of the relationships, but again, it's not the whole modeling sort of thing. It's he's not doing it, so maybe I shouldn't do it. But at the same time, I get it. They're child, and I remember my childhood when I was their age and less. My mom was notorious for feeding us so much sugar it wasn't even funny. But yeah, so I get that sort of. It's also to where your upbringing also does it to where you don't want to deny them because you had it. So it's always one of those sort of things. But it's like now it's coming full circle when you start becoming more aware of your own health. you start realizing, all right, I have to make smarter choices of anything else to do this because I don't want the risk of anything else associated. So it's always that sort of factor. So that sort of change that's happened with us as a whole. But yeah.
I gotcha. So it's like being able to provide an environment where they can still be kids, but also making
Mhm.
sure that they don't have any downstream effects that's happened to it yet in the past, and trying to make sure you balance that fine line of that sweet spot per se.
Yeah. And it's always that. And it's always, like you said, even going back previous, it's like you have to also bring in the whole environment just because, like you said earlier, about the kids being more in front of devices or anything else and not going out and playing and everything else. That's, yeah, God, don't you have to start doing that? But it's also, we're not in the, but now there's always such fear as a parent with just the whole abductions and anything else. Like, yeah, go out, go play. It's not, I'm not saying that didn't happen when I was a kid, but you always went out. Your parents didn't want you back till it was dark. But you don't have that as much around here, and kids are more lapped into their devices. And I think it goes back to modeling. Parents are as well guilty of it. Everybody else now with technology, thanks to whatever device you use, Apple, if it's an Apple phone or an Android phone or whatever you use, you become more so linked into that it's just like it sucks you in where you're like, okay, I should probably be doing something else instead of binge watching the latest show on Netflix or something
Yep.
like that. That's why I think it's sometimes you just have to do it, and you have to almost put it into a cell phone jail to get not only just but not just kids, but also adults be like, hey, this is probably what you should be doing. And it's not that, it has to be a vigorous exercise, as you alluded to. Take a 15-minute walk, eat, take a 15-minute walk after you eat, and everything else is just a good thing to see to get people to just be motivated for that prevention.
Yeah, just those little bits at a time. All right. And then the fun question I always ask everyone who comes on here is, what is your zombie apocalypse survival plan?
All right. First would be number one, would go to Walmart, still buy a shotgun, buy the, what was it, the zombie shotgun shells, just to prevention. Secondly, is also binge watch the heck out of Walking Dead and understand what they did to stop it. Would be one sort of factors, and obviously, I think it would be. I haven't watched the show, but I always seen a lot of stuff with it. But it's always okay. There's the other guy, the one bad guy that was on there that had the baseball bat that was wrapped with barbed wire and stuff. All right, I need one of those just in case. I think it's then start going on social media, find out who these people that are the ones that are savers of it. Be like, I told you, go find their house and raid their stuff. Because there's always somebody that has beliefs in it. There's always conspiracy people that are out there. So there's always somebody out there that has their beliefs. And I'm not saying it could happen. Yes, it could. Like anything else in movies. Something that's why certain movies are made, because there is a chance this could really happen. It's like you said. So it's one of those sort of factors. It's like be prepared. But it's like, all right. But at the same time, please do not go and create harm to anybody else that you see, just because they kind of some of the people that are coming out of the bars and stumbling like the zombies out of the Michael Jackson video. Don't go out there and start bringing harm to them either because of just the way they look. Oh, he's walking that kind of way. He's a
Nah,
zombie.
nah.
So I'm not condoning that sort of thing. But,
Oh goodness. Yeah, just the zombie apocalypse has not happened yet, but now we
not
know
yet,
some
but there's
plans.
always still a possibility.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you so much again for joining me, Patrick. It's been a pleasure. I'm sure we both learned
Yes.
something cool today. And
Absolutely.
how can people find you in case if they have with you, or if they want more about like your work with as a therapist and all, like how can people find you?
For concussions, I do have a Facebook group that is a work in progress that is out there. It is Concussion Roadmap. I do have in the works, again, with concussion, basically the Concussion Roadmap podcast, which is more for education of parents and anybody else with how to, all the tips and tricks that you need for managing your children or your young athletes to doing that. And right now, everything's under construction, but just because I'm not technologically savvy. So basically, I do have a website called WalkerMovementGroup, which is my business for doing. I'm a mobile practice owner too, in addition to being a home health physical therapist, because that's what I'm having to do right now. So those are best ways to reach out to me, or you can always follow me on Instagram at Walker Movement Group, or I think it's P Walker PT as well at Instagram.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you all so much for joining us, and I'll make sure to leave everything below so you can access them, and we'll see y'all next week. Thanks again, Patrick, for coming along,
Thanks,
and
Patrick.
thank you everyone for tuning in and watching and listening.